Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Sunday, May 7th, 2023. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes here and review a couple of articles that I ran into the past week that's definitely connected to death anxiety and terror management theory, and specifically to the book, The One with the Core, on the role of death in life that we're reading on my YouTube channel, on this channel right here. So I wanted to my wife and I found this book called what's it called? Nightmare Scenario, and I can't remember the author's name. I should know it, but we just went through that book, and it is terrifying to understand what happened politically during the COVID-19 pandemic in this country, in the U.S., and that's what this book was about. And as I read articles and I peruse through the news, I see things that are related specifically to death anxiety or terror management theory. And these two articles definitely qualified. So I just want to quickly, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. I just want to share them with you. And so if you watch this, you can see kind of the things that I'm interested in. This first one is called After COVID, Scholars Suggest Society is Caught in a Death Spiral. Now, this is very interesting because this is by Daniel Nuccio, and it's on a website, WashingtonExaminer.com. But this is very interesting because while they talk about specifically what COVID has done, and the stats are amazing, and you can read this on your own if you want. Like I said, it's on the WashingtonExaminer.com, and you can search for it. After COVID, Scholars Suggest Society is Caught in a Death Spiral. Daniel Nuccio, I think is his name. Anyway, so Stanford epidemiologist John Ioannidis, I think that's how you say his name, was one of COVID policy's earliest Cassandras, warning in a March 2020 article published by the health and medicine site STAT. We don't know how long social distancing measures and lockdowns can be maintained without major consequences to the economy, society, and mental health. Unpredictable evolutions may ensue, including financial crisis, unrest, civil strife, war, and a meltdown of the social fabric. So right there, he's talking about this reaction. So one of the things this article leaves out is it leaves out these constant death reminders. So going through COVID, going through this pandemic, every single day, we were reminded of death. I mean, literally reminded of death every single day. Whether you watch the news or not, it was constantly on our minds. It was there. So keeping that in mind, and you look at this psychologically speaking, you would expect these things to increase. So since then, we've seen a number of riots, increased crime, worsening mental and physical health, disrupted supply chains, inflation, civil strife, war, and a meltdown of the social fabric. So again, we're looking at the whole idea of how does this relate when we're reminded of death? What we do is we hold on to our cultural worldviews even tighter. And then sometimes we lash out. So this idea of civil strife, crime, all those kinds of things worsening, it would be expected. The worsening mental and physical health. I think if you look at that, you would see that this affects people that don't have a strong buffer, a strong cultural worldview to cling on to. This is what happens when we don't buy into the illusions of culture, and we find no meaning and purpose. We can't feed our self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the death spiral, they note, is often initiated by an external or internal event, e.g. crisis, causing a trauma or emotional response. On a societal level, they add, this spiral results in an increasing gap between elite and masses and massive resource loss. So there again, we have this separation of us and them. You can see these things building. It goes on to say, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to highlight some of the things. Some signs one society might be in a death spiral, according to the trio, include initial denial, so suboptimal decision making, in which leaders repeatedly turn to the same ineffective solutions and engage in counterproductive coping mechanisms, such as turf protection and passivity, a worsening of the situation and continuous series of crises, and an inability to escape the cycle of poor decision making. That is exactly what we saw happen here. And in this book that we just went through, he really lays it out clearly about what chaos and pandemonium. It was just incredible what was happening in our government at the time. As the death spiral continues, an atmosphere of distress and negativity may develop, the scholar notes. While leaders may increasingly focus on adherence to a long list of rules instead of solving actual problems and censor challenge to the official narrative. Man, if you go back and listen, I think it was chapter 3 or 4 in the book, I can't remember, maybe 5. If you go back and go over the Worm at the Core, he talks about that. We discussed this about how they, rules, and these are things people cling on to in times of crisis. They look for an authoritarian type figure. There's plenty of examples throughout history, but very interesting what's happening here. If this sounds like a pretty apt summary of our society these past few years, you're in good company. According to these 3 authors of the preprint driven by groupthink, action bias, and unreliable metrics, many of our leaders not only overreacted to COVID-19 with grandiose solutions that didn't work, but repeated those failed solutions as they escalated their commitment to becoming victors in an unwinnable war. If for no other reason than they had wagered too much on their failed policies to change course. The ultimate outcome was an increased gap between the elites and the masses, right? That's obvious, and a greater comfort with authoritarianism. There it is. The authors note, although trends related to these outcomes may have predated COVID, the reaction of our leaders to COVID certainly accelerated them. With that stated, the authors of the preprint also offer some hope, putting forth several steps that can be taken for a society to escape its current death spiral, namely acknowledging the death spiral and developing a plan to break it. So here we go. This would be great if this author knew about Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pazinski in The Worm at the Core. He could have really expanded and really gotten deep into the weeds, I guess, if that would have been the ideal thing to do. But he could have really gotten down deep with this one, because this is a perfect analogy of being reminded of death and how we react to that. So they call it a death spiral. I don't know about you, but I have noticed recently since COVID, people are very strange. They're very aggressive. They're very they're difficult, and I understand this, and I put it in the context of this framework, and I understand why that would be. Hey, Chopper, good to see you. I noticed the established medical economy is now projecting an epidemic of loneliness. Yes, I about brought that article in. I think it'll be more relevant down the road with the book, but with the leading cause of death in Canada being euthanasia, I suspect this soon within the States. And very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, Chopper. That's very true. Death of despair. I'm sure you've heard this term again. This is another phenomenon with this loneliness affecting, ironically enough, middle-aged white men, staring you right in the face right now. Middle-aged white men that suffer from this death. This idea. It's part loneliness. It's lost their job, lost their identity, turned to what Kierkegaard called tranquilizing with the trivial. Turned to alcohol and drugs. Found no meaning or significance in life. These are really dangerous positions to be in. And this whole COVID thing, that death spiral article we just went over, this whole COVID thing really brought all this to the forefront. Very interesting stuff. Thanks for sharing that, Chopper. That's a very interesting one. And one more, and then I'll get off of here. This is interesting for the simple fact it seems to be everywhere all the time now. This whole AI thing. I'm not sure how. The title is a little misleading here. The title is "We've Discovered the Secret of Immortality." The bad news is it's not for us. Why the godfather of AI fears for humanity. So you've probably seen in the news, this guy worked for Google. His name is Geoffrey Hinton. He recently quit Google, warning of the dangers of artificial intelligence. Is AI really going to destroy us? And how long do we have to prevent it? The immortality part, as you know, if you followed me reading Becker and my project, and now the Worm at the Core book that we're reading, you'll know that immortality is a huge component for human beings. This desire to achieve literal or symbolic immortality, really to transcend the physical body is what we're talking about, is really priority for us. It helps us repress the death anxiety, the mortality, or the knowledge that we're going to die, more specifically. So the only thing that I really found interesting in this was not the immortality. I know that they imply things about it, but this is what Geoffrey Hinton, he was one of the three godfathers of AI. And he's the Nobel Prize of Computer Science for his work on deep learning. A cognitive psychologist and computer scientist by training. He wasn't motivated by a desire to radically improve technology. Instead, it was to understand more about ourselves. So right off the bat, that's a psychology. That's typical psychology, right? Wanting to go to human behavior. I think human behavior is fascinating and very interesting. But anyway, this is what the gist of this is. What I found most interesting about this article. He said, in trying to model how human brains work, Hinton found himself one of the leaders in the field of neural networking, an approach to building computer systems that can learn from data and experience. Until recently, neural nets were a curiosity, requiring vast computer power to perform simple tasks worse than other approaches. But in the last decade, as the availability of processing power and vast data sets has exploded, the approach Hinton pioneered had ended up at the center of a technological revolution. And by the way, this is by Alex Hern on theguardian.com. Here he says, in trying to think about how the human brain could implement the algorithm behind all these models, I decided that maybe it can't. And maybe these big models are actually much better than the brain, he says. This is the biological intelligence is what he's referring to here. And he says, a biological intelligence such as ours, he says, has advantages. It runs at low power, just 30 watts, even when you're thinking. And every brain is a bit different. That means we learn by mimicking others, but the approach is very inefficient in terms of information transfer. This is the gist of it. Digital intelligence, that's artificial intelligence, by contrast, have an enormous advantage. It's trivial to share information between multiple copies. You pay an enormous cost in terms of energy, but when one of them learns something, all of them know it, and you can easily store more copies. So the good news is we've discovered the secret of immortality. The bad news is it's not for us. So I thought those were interesting. You can read that article as well too if you're interested. But those are a couple that I ran into in the last week regarding death anxiety or terror management. If you pay attention, you'll see it in the news all the time. You'll see it in artwork, hear it in song, any kind of artwork, songs, writing, movies, series, whatever you're doing, you'll see it everywhere all the time. It's kind of like when you buy a red Nissan car, all of a sudden you see tons of red Nissan cars, right? That kind of phenomenon. So I wanted to share that with you. I thought it was interesting. I hope you can join me next Saturday, 10 o'clock Mountain Standard Time for chapter 9 of the book. We only have 2 more chapters after that and we're finished. it gets really down into the weeds and really personal and really interesting at this point. This last chapter, Body and Soul and Uneasy Alliance, was fascinating. I hope the people that joined me, I hope you enjoyed that, or you can go watch the video now if you want. Trevor says, unfortunately, I think the use of AI for chemistry and engineering, the biggest miss of its use may be. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think personally, I think AI is going to do some really wonderful things scientifically, medically, all of those. I think it's going to be phenomenal. Even if you get into law and some of these other disciplines, I think it's going to be very, very good, very fascinating to see the developments there. What I'm concerned about is that we live in a capitalist society, and a capitalist society will push the limits to make the money, and there doesn't seem to be any boundaries on that, and that's where it can really get away without us really understanding what we're doing with it. But I agree with you. I think engineering, medical, chemistry, law, administrative stuff. I think they've already done some really wonderful things with it. So the ability to go through data sets in fractions of seconds, never miss, like having human error there, it will be amazing. It will be. I don't think, maybe I've seen some things in the art world. People are, complaining about it, and they don't want it to be called photography, or they don't want it to be called this or that or whatever. I think it's going to transcend all of that. I think you'll see a lot of use of it in illustration, in advertising. And another big downside of it to me is I think we're going to enter a propaganda era like you've never seen before. And you might not even know we're there. It may be almost virtually impossible to have this epistemic responsibility, or the epistemology, or the knowledge, what we know, how we know what we know, of getting information. It's going to be very, very difficult. And I think propaganda is going to be a huge downside. I don't really care about the art side. It doesn't really affect me that way. I do what I do, and people are welcome to sit on and type in lines on a computer and generate something. What do I care? It's irrelevant to me. I guess it's great if you want to have an argument online about whether it's art or photography or not, but kind of past that point for me, not interested, doesn't matter. I am concerned about capitalism, propaganda, and runaway kind of technology that we don't understand, but we're so hungry for the dollar, we let it run away. On the other hand, medical, science, engineering, stuff that can be really fascinating. So anyway, thanks. Hope to see you next Saturday. Have a great day. Enjoy your weekend or whenever you're watching this, and we'll see you next week.